Welcome to our lesson on the introduction to the t-distribution. So since topic number 4, we've really been answering questions, different types of questions using the z-distribution, and we've really been spending a lot of time in the z-distribution. Now we're going to introduce a completely different distribution called the student's t-distribution, and we'll just call it the t-distribution for short. What's important to note about the t-distribution, there's a couple things. One is we're going to continue on from this point on till with all of the topics that we focus on in this course in the t-distribution. So what we learn here will translate to other hypothesis tests that we'll cover. And the other thing is that this is a more commonly used distribution in the real world of psychological research. And it is a family of tests. So we're going to start with the first of the family, which is called the single sample t-test, to introduce the t-distribution and some of the things that we need to know as we introduce the t-distribution. So the purpose of this lesson is really to sort of establish the criteria for us to determine when we would use a single sample t-test, and we want to sort of put that and compare it with our choice to choose the single sample z-test. So we'll make a lot of comparisons between the single sample z and the single sample t to determine what is the criteria, what do we need to know in order for us to say, I'm going to choose a single sample t-test versus the single sample z-test. We'll also learn how to conduct a single sample t-test. We're going to use the same steps that we introduced with our single sample z-test, our introduction to hypothesis test. But as I mentioned in that topic, is that there's going to be some slight variations. Now that we've moved from the z-distribution to the t-distribution, there's going to be some consequences. And that means that there's going to be changes within those steps. But broadly, the steps will continue through the rest of the course with slight variations. And this will be the first variation that we experience. Specifically, what we're going to learn is we're going to learn what is the difference between the single sample z-test and the single sample t-test. As I just mentioned, what are the reasons, what do we need to know in order to determine a z-test versus the t-test, and what are the differences there? We'll also talk a little bit about the shape of the t-distribution, which really is a consequence of one of the reasons that we choose to do a t-test. And we'll talk a little bit about the difference between the z-distribution and the t-distribution. We'll also introduce a new table. Just as we had a z table, now we're going to have a t table. Learn how to read that to get the values that are important for us to establish the criteria in step number 2. And then we'll go through the 4 steps to conduct a single sample t-test. And then we'll also learn how to conduct a single sample t-test using Jamovi, talk a little bit about the output and what do we need to do in order to get the right output using Jamovi. So that's really what we'll focus on in this topic. As I mentioned, this is an important sort of transition to a new distribution, which means we have to learn some other things, but this will be the distribution that we'll continue on with for the rest of the class. And all of the tests that we cover, we're going to use the t-distribution. So that's a little bit about what we'll learn in this topic. You'll see in the videos we have some real directed content about the specific sort of comparison with the z and t. And then sort of going through the 4 steps and then Jamovi for a single sample t-test. So that's all I have in this video here. If you have questions, please let me know.